The other day, I was reading an article on SciBlog, a psychology blog site that attempts to explain a psychological study which, according to the author, seems to imply that humans are mechanical robots merely controlled by neuronal impulses in our brains, and that free will is an illusory conception that humans have constructed to cope with death. There have been numerous studies, including the one described in that article, which show that neurons in the brain begin to fire before the person can report being conscious of their decision to, for example, pick up a pencil, or before they can predict exactly which one of five circles on a computer screen changes color first or at all. And that latter example is the experiment that was referred to in the article. The article also mentions the term unconscious several times, and the usages imply that unconscious should be defined merely as the mechanical workings of the brain. My aims in this video, I'm reading from my blog post actually, are to explain why that's an oversimplified and unsophisticated definition of unconscious, and also to suggest, partly on that basis, why these sorts of studies not only do not imply that free will is an illusion, but that they have virtually no bearing on what constitutes free will to begin with, based on a misunderstanding of consciousness, unconsciousness, and free willness. So let's look for a less trivial definition of the word unconscious. Okay. There's one thing that article and anyone who would agree with its premises gets right, that we are not in total control of what we see, understand, and believe. However, this truth cannot be maintained to every degree of analysis imaginable. The highest degree being, say, the ontology of free will and morals, arguably, or spiritual interaction or enlightenment. This raises a semantic problem, for one. Everyone has their own definition of what constitutes unconscious and even free will. The level of analysis that the article attempts to operate on is one of moral ontology, but it fails. Instead, it maintains the assumption that all that exists in us are mechanistic processes, and those processes are unconscious. We are our brains, and our brains are computer processors that take in data and organize that data for output toward some end geared toward survival merely. And that when we're faced with stimuli relevant to our experiences, we merely react in accordance with our pre-organized data. Well, this is partially correct. We are more nature than nurture, after all. But how does this imply that we don't have free will? Let's step back first and look at what we can infer from this article's usage of unconscious. So neuronal activity is unconscious, materialists will hold. Materialists being someone who believes that only that which is based in material reality, quantifiable matter and energy, is real. But yes, we know that to the same extent that we know that digestion in the intestines is unconscious, and it need not be overstated. It is merely a biological process per se. However, biological processes tell us very little about our conscious world, the reality that we actually experience. They presuppose that the origins of our behaviors and decisions are pre-programmed inside our brains, and neuronal activity is the first step in activating those programs, which we call decisions. This is an assumption, albeit a rather interesting one. Those who believe that this process is the causal origin of our behavior commit the most basic fallacy in science, the one that scientists make the biggest deal about. Correlation without causation. Why do they assume that the brain is the beginning when the brain requires the world to gather information to begin with, from which to gather information? And why would anyone assume that we are disconnected from objective reality to the extent that we are separate and not intimately connected to it in a way that our actions most likely have ancient origins? What is left once we commit to this materialist view of perception? It seems that the world, even in their circular view, must come prior to our brains, our ability to perceive it, right? A lot is left over from the materialist view, I would say. In fact, one can control some aspects of even these biological, what they call unconscious processes. If I am lactose intolerant, for example, I can consciously avoid dairy, so my digestion maintains a regular track. In the same way, I can somewhat control what my brain processes. If I am at a music festival, for example, and I have to decide whether I want to attend the concert of a band I've already seen or that of a new band I haven't yet seen, my decision will affect what my brain processes. If I choose the familiar option, I will go to the show having a certain expectation based on what I've already processed from previous shows of theirs. If I choose the unfamiliar band, which is statistically less likely for most people, then I am choosing a new path. My experience will not be dictated by any biases. And in a way, the show will present a challenge for me, a challenge to what I already know and expect of music generally. It's not only those biological processes that are necessarily unconscious, but so are some of the decisions we make, which come prior to those processes. We can, however, take control of those decisions if we think about learning and decision making per se in the right way. It requires self-awareness. So let's think about it like this. Perhaps the origins of our behavior and decisions are in the world to a degree, but not in the minute-by-minute stimuli-centric world that neuromaterialists would like to believe. If it were that way, then we would not even be able to inquire about how our minds work as we are doing now, which requires temporarily stepping outside of our minds, much less to overcome social pressure to leave our friend group at a music festival to see the band that we want to see alone, right? What I'm dancing around now is the more nuanced meaning of unconscious that we find in fringe psychology and spiritual circles. As Carl Jung says, to know oneself is to make the unconscious conscious. I'm not talking about digestion, okay, or neuronal firings in the brain. We can observe in my field of birth chart astrology that people live out their birth charts, the information present in them, until they seek knowledge about them, especially. The birth chart represents one's innate set of perceptions and predispositions for responding to different aspects of reality. Someone is likely even living out their transits when they come to me for consultation. That is that there is something external compelling them to learn about themselves at a particular time. But free will is clearly expressed in how they make use of that information that I give them. The better one knows oneself, the more opportunities they will have to express their free will. There is still no guarantee, however, that they will. As I always say, I don't tell people what to do because I can't. I simply help them to own what they choose to do, if indeed they are choosing. So free will is expressed through choice, and choice is an opportunity that is granted to someone based on the level of self-awareness that they have. So there's a strong case that it is not when someone is acting from their natural proclivities, which are present in the birth chart, but rather only when someone acts against them or perhaps makes productive, truthful use of them. uh, apart from what is normal and comfortable for them, that they are expressing free will. So act against your natural inclinations when they're not good or true, and capitalize on them and have them take a strong, sustainable form when they are good. And that takes moral judgment, right? So this opposition to the self, in a sense, is actually a flow with the self, flow with your best possible version of yourself that's granted to you by nature, that's represented by your aspects in your birth chart. But this behavior must be founded, it must be founded on moral principles, boundaries, or in the very least, external rules, right? These represent three different degrees and kinds of self-governance and the spectrum of our human relationship to that concept. And only one fully shows that free will can be expressed in any case when they do so in a particular way. So in the next post or next video, in this case, I will describe these three levels of self-governance and show the connection from free will to only one of them, perhaps revealing something about the origins of autonomous decision-making itself that evaded us in the beginning of this article. So see you guys in that next video. Cheers.